that come from the mother lode. So these very depleted volcanic soils are perfect for these vines. Now, Terra Alta has been organic for 20 years. And so you see a lot of these grasses are growing on the berms. The berm is that section directly under the vine that is very hard to cultivate. So people put herbicide sprays to kill the grasses there. Well, we don't. So we'll later on bury these weeds with dirt that we throw on top, and we manage the weeds that way. But the weeds give us a lot of nutrition and build the soil to create these vines. Now, if you look at these vines, this is not how they grow Albariño in Galicia, Spain. Galicia is a northwestern corner of Spain that is surrounded on all sides by the Atlantic Ocean. And it has these things called rías, which is the Spanish or the Galician term for fjords. And so you have these deep, deep fjords that come inland that bring all these very cold Atlantic waters and salmon and seafood and all that into the Galician coastline. And you have Albariño as a variety that grows very well there. It's a cold climate variety. It is rained on all the time. They receive between 50 and 70 inches of rain in Galicia. We don't do that in Lodi. But that's why the Albariño has kind of adapted itself to that climate by having these long, wispy shoots with tiny leaves that are very furry, very hairy to make sure that the water doesn't stick to it, that it bounces off. And you can see that here. So if you look at this vine, this is, of course, at the very, very beginning stages, but you have this, what's called pubescence, or this very hairy aspect to the leaf surface on both sides. You also have something that's kind of odd for a red variety, and that is that you have this pinkish little tips, the apical meristem, the leaves are naturally. As the vine grows older or the canes grow longer, that disappears. But if you look at a cane or a shoot, and you cluster right there, and there's a cluster right there. Can you guys see that? Beautiful little tiny clusters. Those clusters will eventually grow to be about the size of a very tight fist, like a little grenade. They're very tight, they're very small, and they have very, very thick skins with a big waxy cuticle so that they're very protected from mildew. And that's how we receive them in the winery. So the Albariño, with all that skin, tends to have a lot of concentration of aromatics and flavors that then Elyse can just do crazy things with in the winery.
Hey Marcus, just really quick,
yeah.
you skipped out for a second. Can you show us the cluster again?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Okay, so let's go to this one right here. Okay, here's the shoot, and here's the leaves, and then you have one cluster right here, and you have another cluster right there. Those are the clusters. Now, they haven't flowered yet. They're going to flower in about 6 weeks. But right now, we know that we have a pretty good crop. And you can see that this cluster actually even has a shoulder, this little guy right here, right? So that's going to be a relatively larger cluster. And then right over here is the growth point. Here's the growing tip. And as that thing grows out, more and more leaves will grow on this cane. And ultimately, to be able to ripen 2 clusters, you need to have a cane that is going to be roughly about 4 feet long with 12 to 16 leaves on it. That's all you need to ripen the Albariño. Now, one thing, if you go to Galicia, which I hope all of you have the opportunity to do this one day, their Albariño is grown, the modern Albariño is grown a little bit more like we're growing it here. But their traditional vineyards, of course, it's the rías, right? It's all these fjords. It's all granite soils there, kind of like our Sierra Nevadas. So they actually, instead of having steel stakes, they have basically square granite posts that go way up high into the air. And instead of having rows that are straight, like if you can see down this row right over here, they have this trellis system that goes both directions like this, and they grow their vines way high up in the air across the entire surface area of the soil. And they do that because they have so much rain. And so that allows the wind to blow all the water off because it's so far high up into the air. And I think it's so neat that they use their local materials like granite posts to be able to build. So we're modifying that a little bit here in California, but what we don't modify is the fact that we want to be totally true to the varietal. So we brought the true budwood over, We planted it in soils that are very similar to the ones you'd find in Galicia. We planted them to the same rootstocks they do over there. We pick it at a degree of sugar that's around 21 bricks. And for those of you who don't know what that means, it's real easy. There was a professor, his name was Dr. Bricks, and he developed a way to categorize the level of sugar in water. And he named it after himself. It's almost like everything else. Like when you buy a bottle of Listerine, Dr. Lister developed that, Pasteurization, Pasteur. So the same thing with Dr. Bricks. He figured out a scale and he said, okay, basically this is how you figure out how much sugar is in your water. Well, for wine grapes, you typically want things between, let's say, 21 bricks at a low to about 28 bricks as a high, depending on the variety and what you're trying to achieve. With Albariño, we stay on the very low end of that spectrum. So, and that's exactly what they do in Galicia. So we're trying to stay true, absolutely, to the winemaking styles of Spain, because we are trying to bring a part of Spain to our little corner. So with that, I think it's probably time now to pop open the bottle of the Rosado and have Elyse take you through the cellar so that she can walk you through that process.
All right. Well, welcome everyone into the Bokisch Vineyards barrel room. It's good to have you all here. I wish you were all here in person, but a virtual tasting is just as good. So I want to just give a little bit of background for myself and where I came from and coming to Bokisch. So I've been the winemaker here since 2014. And I met Liz and Markus many, many years ago after my husband and I had been on our honeymoon partially in Spain. And I discovered Spanish wines. And in 2006, I was at a big wine tasting in San Francisco and discovered that there were Spanish wines being made in Lodi, California. And of course, at that time, I had no idea where Lodi was, but had discovered Bokisch and started drinking their wines. I joined their wine club in 2007. And then in 2008, after having really no background in winemaking, I decided to jump from my previous profession, working for government and local nonprofits, into the wine business. And never thought I was going to be a winemaker, but I found myself getting into that direction. And in 2011, I started buying grapes from Markus and Liz, and I was buying Albariño and Tempranillo, and then that expanded into Graciano and some other things. And so we've had a very long relationship. And then finally, when they said they were building their own winery at the end of 2013, I convinced them to hire me as their winemaker, and it's been a great relationship ever since. And we've had a lot of fun with it, and so we've been doing a lot of things. So here we are in the barrel room. We have capacity for about 800 barrels in here right now. We've got more than 800 barrels in here right now, and about 90% of them are full with wine. So one of the things that we do is called custom crush. And so we make wine for other wineries. So we've got 6 custom crush wineries that are here right now making wine with us. They bring their grapes to us, which are mostly Bokisch grapes, and we're making their wines. So that's kind of a little bit about what we're doing here in the barrel room and what we're doing here at the winery. The more important thing is the Rosado. And so for those of you who have this in your glass, and for those of you who don't, and I think a lot of people, we just released this last week. People have been chomping at the bit to get at this because we released our 2018 Rosado last April, and we sold out by the beginning of June. So we've been sold out of this wine for a very long time. And so we know that everybody's been pretty excited about this. So we just released this last week, 2019. It's from the Terra Alta Vineyard, from the Clements Oaks sub-appellation of Lodi. So for those of you who may not know, there are actually 7 sub-appellations of the Lodi, the bigger Lodi appellation, which Markus was a very big part of making sure that we had those 7 sub appellations, because it's all determined by soil types, and they're very different soil types, and each soil type produces a very different wine. So the Clements Hills is very close to the Sierra foothills, so we're kind of in the toe of the foothills. It's where our winery is located. And so we have a little bit of rolling hills. Most of the rest of Lodi is very flat. So this Rosado, the really neat thing about this is this has always been a Grenache based, or what we call Grenacha, which is the Spanish word for Grenache, Grenache based rosé. And the last couple of years, we've been playing around with it a little bit. As I go out and I'm through the growing season, I'm out in the vineyards and I'm sampling the grapes in my little Ziploc bags. I'm out there and I'm pulling little berry samples, and I come back into the winery and I'm tasting things and I'm looking at color. What I found out was that the Tempranillo from Markus and Liz's backyard vineyard, Las Oasis, that Tempranillo had really good color at lower sugars. So it had really good color, had really good flavors. And I said to Markus and Liz, hey, let's try this out. Let's try blending this in with the Grenacha. So the other thing, kind of backtrack a little bit, we make an intentional rosé. So we are picking the grapes, the red grapes, at a lower sugar level so that we get higher acids. We get these great, beautiful, bright flavors at a lower alcohol level, because we don't want our rosé to be a really high alcohol. So that's why a couple of years ago I said Tempranillo has got great color. Grenacha, not such great color most of the time because the skins are pretty light. So it makes it a little bit challenging to make a darker rosé from that Grenacha grape. So we added some Tempranillo, and it turned out worked amazingly well. It was a really great rosé. So last year, we decided we were going to try a little bit of Graciano. And the reason we tried Graciano is going back to when I said we do some custom crush for some other wineries, we had a winery in Los Angeles that was making a Graciano rosé, which I thought was crazy, because Graciano, we use that in our red wines as a wine that colors. It gives some color because it's a very dark colored grape. So I had the benefit of having this winery make rosé from this, and it turned out to be beautiful. Now, the only thing is, when you press this, because talking about doing an intentional rosé, picking it at lower sugar levels, this client was picking it at very lower sugar levels. But because the skins are so dark, when you put it into the press, when you start pressing it really hard, what happens is the color starts getting really dark. And my assistant winemaker and myself, as this was going on, we were like, holy cow, it looks like a red wine. And so it was really kind of shocking. The color dropped out a little bit and the flavors were great. And so we decided to try Graciano this last year in 2019. So the Rosado that some of you have in your glass, and those of you that don't, but the 2019 that we just released has Tempranillo from the Las Oasis vineyard, just a touch, and then Graciano from the Terra Alta vineyard. So the other thing that is a little bit different about our Rosado is we ferment it and age it in oak barrels, and it's neutral oak. So you're not getting that oakiness, but you're getting some texture. So it's a little bit of a rounder, a little bit of a bigger Rosado, a little bit of a bigger rosé. But it's a really delicious, delicious wine. So that Graciano has added, what we have found is a little bit more of a tropical note to it. In the early stages, when we were tasting it, it was like this crazy guava and papaya. We couldn't believe what it was tasting like. And it kind of changed. And so that's the thing that you guys should all know, is that wine really does change over time. So we have things that happen during fermentation where you're just like, my goodness, this is crazy. And then as it ages, and as it, when it ferments and it ages, things change. And so as a winemaker, you kind of have to have a little bit of faith about how things are going. And that's the one thing about Rosado, is you kind of have to have a little bit of faith. People ask me all the time, what's your favorite wine to make? What's your favorite grape to work with? What's the easiest wine to make? What's your hardest wine to make? And I would say that rosé is the hardest wine to make, because there are so many different factors. Because we do make it as an intentional rosé, and Grenache is the base, the skins are so light that we're trying to, it's hard to not get that color. And so that's why we added Tempranillo and Graciano. So what you'll get from this Rosado is a lot of strawberry notes, some tropical notes. This is the perfect spring wine. I know Easter is coming up. This is a great Easter wine. We did not make a lot of this. We made a little under 300 cases. So I would say, if you love this wine, and I know that people, you've been chomping at the bit for this. We've been sold out for a very long time. I would say, if you love this wine, get it while you can.
We have a good question that came in.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more in depth of what an intentional rosé means?
So an intentional rosé is, we are picking the grapes at lower sugars. So there's a couple different ways to make rosé. One of them is to make an intentional rosé, which is to pick grapes at lower sugar levels. And so you're going out and you're sampling and you're picking at lower sugars, and then putting those grapes straight into the press. So you pick them, they go straight into the press. One of the other ways to do it is what's called a saignée method. And saignée in French means to bleed. And so you're picking, if we were going to do that with our Grenache, we would pick at our normal sugars for our red wine, and we would bleed off of that tank. So when you're crushing your grapes that very first day, you crush your grapes, they go into a tank, and then you bleed off that tank, because the skins are where all the color is. So when you bleed off that tank, you're getting lighter color after, 8, 10, 24 hours. But what we're doing is we're actually picking it at a lower sugar level. So we have lower alcohol levels, higher acidity, a lot more bright strawberry flavors and other fruit flavors that you would get from that.
So Elyse, this is our Bokisch Rosé, which everyone knows, but we actually have a second rosé coming down the pipeline this year, our Bokisch Family Estate Rosé. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. So you gave away the secret. So our staff has for many years said we need to do a second rosé, and I've resisted for a lot of years to do a second rosé. But we do have a second rosé that we're doing, and we're very excited about it. We are bottling this spring, and it is for our family estate label. So here is the rosé. It's a little bit lighter than the other Rosado, and this is from Markus and Liz's backyard vineyard, Las Cerezas. So this is family estate. This is Graciano and Tempranillo. It's about a 60-40 blend, 60% Graciano and 40% Tempranillo. So the difference with this is our Bokisch Rosado that has been released is in oak, and this one is in 100% stainless steel. So it was fermented in stainless steel, so it's going to be a little bit brighter, a little bit more acid. It's just going to be a little bit, a little bit more of that fun, like bright wine. So what we we'll probably sell out of our Bokisch Rosado in a couple months, and then this one is right behind it. So we're going to have 2 rosés this year. So we're very excited about that.
Comes out in July.
And it comes out in July.
Thanks for that little plug. So Elyse, we have another good question here actually coming from your husband. What was the first vintage of Bokisch Rosado and how much did you make?
Well, that's a question for Liz and Markus.
Liz is on, but Markus, are you? No, he's just hanging out on the lawn.
I think, if you can hear me, I do not remember our first Rosado by date. I mean, because we've been making wine for 20 years, and you know, I have a great memory, but I don't exactly remember our first Rosado. So,
all right, we'll give you guys a pass for this one. Markus, are you live?
Yeah, well, I'm here. Yeah, can you hear me?
Oh yeah, so we have a good question for you. If your memory serves you well, what was the first vintage of Bokisch Rosado and how much did we make?
1898. I was a very young man at the time. 1898. It was 2004 because we used to buy some fruit from a little tiny vineyard known as Belle Colline, and we established that vineyard in 2000. And the first fruit that came off that vineyard was like 2002, I believe. And it was shortly thereafter, 2004, that we started using a little bit of the fruit combined with the fruit that we had here. And it was a blend of, in those days, oh my goodness, should I dare say this? It was Garnacha from Terra Alta.
Barbera.
And a little bit of Barbera from the Belle Colline vineyard that gave it that little zing and that little acidity. And it was absolutely delicious.
Good job, team. We got the question answered.
So I can tell you, though, that in 2004, Liz and I were making rosés because we loved rosés, not because there was a market for rosés. We would only make half a pallet at most, and we had a hard time getting rid of it. I think probably we drank most of it ourselves. But yeah, no, there was no rosé market back then. You know, it was white zin, and that was it, and that was a declining market. So, but we did it because we loved it, and here we are all these years later, sticking with our rosé because that is a phenomenal wine. And I think in Europe now it has surpassed white wine as a category. So that'll probably happen here as well.
All right, Markus, we're here. Next wine we want to talk about is our Graciano, and you have that up there. Our Graciano is in our rosé. Talk about our Graciano.
Okay, so the Graciano, before I talk about the Graciano, I know that all of you are missing our Fireside Fridays, and I know you're missing our wonderful area here with the fire pits, and you can see how many people are here really having fun. Anyhow, so hopefully we'll be able to start those again really soon because this place is needing humanity here. So Anton's going to pan a little bit. You're going to see the blue oaks in the background that are just leafing out young, beautiful green leaves. Those are the oaks that grow in the Clemens Hills. And as you go over here and see this hill, you'll go over the hill and you'll see another hill in the background that's a little greener. That's our Chardonnay. And then there's an oak grove. And behind that oak grove is our 8 acres of Terra Alta Graciano. It was the last variety to be planted and to finish out the planting of Terra Alta. And so it's right over that hill. But I figured I didn't have enough time. Anton and I didn't have enough time to drive all the way out there. And this, by the way, is a beautiful setting. So let's talk about the 2017 Graciano. First of all, I remember reading about Graciano before we even had a vineyard planted here. I was a vineyard consultant. I was helping people try to figure out their vineyard programs. And I remember at one point I was with this grower, Carl Jagier, and he had some Tempranillo that I convinced him to plant. And I said, you know, in the literature, it states that the best Riojas always have a little bit of Graciano in them. And he said, do we have Graciano in California? I said, probably at the germplasm repository, maybe we can bring it in. He looked at me and he said, I'll wait until you do it. You do it first, and then I'll follow your lead. And certainly that was, I think, a moment of light bulb going off in my mind thinking, he's right. I should do it. I read it in the literature. I'm going to do this. And so when Liz and I went to bring the Graciano into California, we were the very first people to bring the variety in. It had never existed in California. It was not in the germplasm repository. We actually had to convince the federal government that it was in fact a variety to be able to put the name on the label. So that goes back to 1999. Our very first vintage, which I think was a 2001, we didn't realize that it was not recognized as a varietal in California, so we had to call our first wine Red Table Wine. And in the back label, it said Graciano. But we brought it in not to make a Graciano. We brought it in because it was supposed to be an ameliorator to Tempranillo. It was supposed to make better Tempranillos. And brought it in, and we realized why not a lot of people plant it. It's a very hard variety to grow. It doesn't graft well. It grows out sporadically. The clusters are very far apart in terms of their ripeness. So you have to pass through the vineyard time and time again to try to eliminate any green shoots, eliminate any green clusters, really tighten that phenological ripeness window to be able to get the quality that Graciano can give. I quickly discovered what an ancient variety it was. I kept on reading more and more into the literature about it, and it turns out that no one really knows the origins of Graciano, certainly not from the Romans. It predates the Romans to the ancient Iberian tribes that would actually ferment wild grapes and make their wines all over the Spanish peninsula. And so it is thought to be originating in the Basque country of Navarre, just north of, and Alavesa, just north of the main Rioja Valley. And it is, again, ancient. So it has these large seeds, thick skins. It's just bizarre. And it creates an aromatic component of blackberry, blueberry, forest fruit that is really unique to reds. And so it's very complementary to Tempranillo. Interestingly enough, it's not a huge tannic monster. It's a very mellow variety. And so it actually benefits when you make it into its own wine with a little bit of tannins from the Tempranillo. But again, we never even planned on making Graciano. We just brought it in to make the Tempranillo. Well, after growing it out and separately fermenting it in the cellar and tasting it in the spring, and went through these awkward reductive stages, and it was just bizarre. And then in the spring of our first vintage, we said, what the hell is going on? This is amazing wine. We need to put it in a bottle and do it by ourselves. And so we did that. And of course, very hard sale. No one knew what it was. But we loved it. And we have, since that day on, decided that we're always going to make a Graciano. And since that day, and for various and sundry reasons, it's, again, become pretty well known now in California and in the greater United States. And there are quite a few wineries, probably over 20 in California, that are making a Graciano now from our original importation of cuttings. So we're very excited about it. It is also an organic vineyard, and one of the things that we like about the organic blocks that we have here is that we try to be really creative about how we resolve disease problems, disease pressures. In a conventional vineyard, you're going to go up and down your rows, and you're going to go on a very prescribed, almost kind of method of farming and disease control. And you are going to be preemptive. You're going to try to kill anything before it comes out. With organic farming, you don't have those same controls in a vineyard because your tools that you have in your satchel aren't that powerful. And so you have to be thinking way ahead, understanding population dynamics of insects and fungi and all kinds of stuff so that it doesn't overwhelm the crop. And the reason I tell you this is about 7 or 8 years ago, a company out of Oregon called Suterra came up with something that's fantastic at disrupting the life cycle of the vine mealybug. Now, I'll give you that as just a single example, but when I got into this business, you probably had one invasive species every 5 or 6 years that would come in and disrupt your farming practices. You have to figure out a whole new process and protocols to control that. Now it's like every other year you get an invasive species. The Chinese lanternfly is the next one that's going to hit California. So, but about 5 years ago, the vine mealybug started getting out of control. And when that happens, you have a lot of people who make a lot of money selling chemicals to growers to be able to control those populations. We have this. This is a little tiny tab with a little black dot on it. And in that black dot, it's impregnated with a pheromone. And a pheromone is a chemical that a female vine mealybug exudes so that the males get attracted to her. And they can just pinpoint, like a target right to the female. But with this, if you have about 300 of these per acre, it impregnates the air with this pheromone, and the males cannot find the females for the life of them. And the females sit there, not fertilizing their eggs. And within a week, they wither and they die. And so no pesticides, no nothing. Modern technology that tricks the male vine mealybug into not being able to find the females. And that's the really cool thing about organics, because there's so many new products that are being developed there that I think this is the way the industry is going to go. And also what's really cool about it is that then we have a better representation of what the true terroir is. We're not using herbicides to kill the weeds that might then affect the soil biome, that then affects the nutrition of the vine, that then affects the wine quality. So we have more of a representation of what that true terroir could do. So in any event, that's a little bit about organic farming, just a snippet to entice you about it. Graciano, it still is one of my favorite go-tos. We are importing more varieties that are eclectic and hard to find. We will eventually have the biggest Spanish varietal collection in the U.S. And with that, Elyse is going to have a lot of tools in her satchel to play around with. So,
well, I actually wanted to go back to what you were talking about, the Graciano. So it's a little bit of a pain in the neck in the vineyard, but in the cellar, it is, man, I tell you, in 2014, my first vintage working for Markus and Liz, and I knew that the Graciano was Marcus's favorite variety. I thought I had screwed it up. I mean, I had made Graciano for myself for a couple of years in very small quantities, but when you go from a ton of fruit to 15 tons of fruit, it's a totally different thing. And so that first vintage, 2014, my staff were, you know, we had drained a tank out, it had finished fermentation, and we had drained the tank of all of the wine, and then we were pulling out the rest of the grapes that had been fermenting for pressing, and all you could hear was this like, and it was the Graciano grape has giant seeds, like really, really giant seeds that I had never seen before. And so I'm hearing this and I was like, oh my gosh, what is going on? And I took a picture and I sent it to Markus, and he said, oh no, it's okay. It's Graciano. It's fine. And then we threw it in the press to press it off, the rest of it. And my harvest intern at the time was like, hey boss, this tastes awful. And I was like, oh, this is great. My first vintage for Bokisch, and it's Marcus's favorite variety, and I completely screwed it up. It's the variety that has taught me patience, because you have to just kind of have a leap of faith. And so as it went through aging, it's like a petulant teenager. Like, it's just like, it's up and it's down and it's up and it's down. And it turns out that you just kind of have to ride it and not get too freaked out about it. And then it makes this amazing wine. So thankfully I didn't screw it up in 2014, and I'm still here in 2020.
Oh, but if anything, you just brought more of everything it has to offer to the forefront. So one of the things about Graciano too that very few people know about is its age worthiness. And not surprisingly, another component of being blended to Tempranillo, which is also another age worthy wine. These wines, you can pull a 10-year-old, 15-year-old sample of Graciano from our cellar, and they're just phenomenal. They just age beautifully. So
yeah.
Anyhow, so I'm really happy that we had such a great attendance, and I'm really happy that so many people are on board with this. So first of all, before I pass it on, hats off to everybody who is on at Zoom right now.
Yeah.
And with that, I think it's time to pass it on to the chef of our company. That's Liz Bokisch.
Liz. All right. Okay. So for those of you who are following along in the tasting, it's time for Tempranillo. Tempranillo is king. It's been one of our flagship wines, neck and neck with Albariño. Tempranillo sometimes, oh, look at that. Oh, the sound of the bottle pouring into the glass. Tempranillo is sometimes referred to as the Cabernet of Spain. And it's not because it tastes like Cabernet, but it is like the quintessential Spanish variety. And it has the structure and some of the qualities that some people look to for Cabernet. And so Tempranillo is definitely one of our favorite varieties. And what's so unique and special about our Tempranillo is because my husband, crazy nut that he is, whom I love so much, decided to bring over a Masal selection of clone and budwood material from Spain. So what does that mean? I mean, mostly when you plant a vineyard, you call your nursery guy, he sends you the plants that are already grafted onto the rootstock, and you plant Tempranillo, and you say, okay, I want this clone or that clone. Well, you're getting one clone. You're getting one unique quality. So what Markus did when he planted our original vineyard, and the same goes for the Graciano that we just tasted, and the Albariño, is he had, through our contacts in Spain, and this was back in 1999 that we planted this first Tempranillo, he brought over cuttings that were from a whole entire vineyard. So that's a selección masal. It has a representation of the entire vineyard. So what happens with that, instead of having one clone of Markus Bokisch, you have Markus, Liz, Elyse, Rich, Christine, D'Angelo, Meme. You got everybody in this room and one vineyard, and it makes a much better wine because of all those layers of characteristics. So that's one of the things that makes our Tempranillo so special. This is the Liberty Oaks vineyard, which comes from the budwood cuttings of, if you could see my beautiful backyard right here, our 1 acre that we first planted. And when we saw that it was successful in Lodi, then we planted some more acres out at Liberty Oaks Vineyard. And it's just become our fan favorite and one of our most favorite wines. Those of you who have had the chance to taste our Gran Reserva Tempranillo will know that Tempranillo is a wine that ages so beautifully. It's really meant for aging. I mean, this 17 is just tasting great. It's beautiful, but this wine will continue to age better and better over the years. And again, maybe similar to why people say it's like a Cabernet. It ages really, really well. So we're going to pair this Tempranillo with my recipe here, which is the mushrooms. And we've got 2 different kinds of mushrooms. We have some crimini or portobello. I actually got some baby portobellos, but you can use just the regular brown mushrooms. And then you want to do some shiitakes to give a little different mushroom flavor, or you can do a variety of mushrooms. So what you first are going to do is saute some onions slowly to get them caramelized. And then you're going to put in your mushrooms after about 5 minutes. Now, mushrooms, there's different theories. Should I wash my mushroom or not before using it? I love it when actually I see some dirt on the mushroom, because then I know it's fresh. But I tend to not want to wash them. I tend to just use a wetted paper towel and just rub off the dirt. If you wash your mushrooms, if you allow them to soak up water, they're going to get soggy. And you definitely don't want soggy mushrooms if you're putting them raw into anything like a salad. If you saute them, that's okay, but they already have a lot of water, so you don't want to let them absorb water. So if you do feel like you need to wash them, that's okay. Just dry them with a paper towel first before you saute them. So I'm going to get this started again. And your mushrooms, you basically are just going to trim off the ends, and then you're going to just slice them up. And you're going to saute them. And as you can see, I already have some going here. After the mushrooms and the onions are sauteed together, and oh, I didn't mention, always nice if you can use some really, really good quality olive oil, because the mushrooms are going to absorb the olive oil, okay? So this is where you want to use the good stuff, okay? And we have some beautiful olive oil from our Terra Alta vineyard. And so if you haven't gotten any, haven't had a chance to taste it, it's for sale at the tasting room. You can add that onto your orders. So you want to put some really good quality olive oil in the pan there. And these are from our estate grown olives right there at Terra Alta vineyard. So you're gonna let that cook up a little bit. And then comes the prosciutto. Hold on one second. Okay, you can use jamon serrano, but it's harder to find, and especially nowadays with our limited access to grocery shopping. I like to use prosciutto when I can't find jamon serrano. Now, one thing about prosciutto is it's really difficult to work with. Have you ever tried using it where you just can't peel it off? Well, that happens quite a bit. So it's always better to use prosciutto when it's cold. Don't let it sit on the counter because it's harder to peel it off of that paper, that little plastic paper that's in between. It starts to stick together. So if you keep it cold until the moment you need it, it makes it much easier. And it's much easier to use scissors than cutting it with a knife. Let me peel this off here. Look how thin that is. Okay, so if you can just peel that off, and what I like to do too with the mushrooms is I move them to the side, and then you're gonna fold your prosciutto and just cut it into pieces on the other side of the pan, because if you cut it and throw it together, the mushrooms, it's all gonna clump together and it's gonna really get you frustrated. So it's better to cook it in a little separate corner of your frying pan and let it get a little crispy there off to the side. Okay? That way you can keep it separated. But if you throw it in and it becomes a clump, just pull it out, chop it up, and throw it back in. It won't hurt. Okay, now you're going to, you need a little wine. It's always good to start your meal with white. That's what I like to do. I get asked a lot of times, what's my favorite wine? It's a very hard question to answer, but my 5 o'clock favorite is my Albariño. So I'm gonna throw in a little splash. Oh, hear that? And that's going to just give you some juices, because this is going to be served on some bread, toasted, with some blue cheese. So what kind of blue cheese? I prefer to use like the Point Reyes blue cheese because it's creamy, and you're gonna spread it onto your piece of bread. So you want a creamy blue cheese. Gorgonzola is a more crumbly, so this Point Reyes blue is really nice to use for that. And so I'm gonna use that to spread onto my toast. And you can also use Roquefort, but it's very, very strong, and it probably will overpower your mushrooms. So we got so much wine here. I gotta move the wine out of the way. Okay, so of course you need a little color, a little brightness. So we're going to cut up a little parsley here. Perejil, as they call it. Hola, Meme. I know you're listening.
So Liz, we just had a question come in. So what kind of bread do you recommend using for this recipe? They're jumping ahead a little bit, but
Oh,
Who
good.
doesn't love bread?
No problem. I like to use, you can use French baguette. You know, I like the old world, not too fluffy because you're gonna toast it. Actually, right here, I have a ciabatta baguette. Now, right now, it's hard to find bread, so get whichever you can. Even if you have to get some sliced sourdough, use your sliced sourdough, okay? That will work right now. But this is a ciabatta, and one of the things I like to do when I toast it up is, I'm glad this person asked the question, I like to cut it at an angle, okay? Because then you get a larger piece of bread. It looks very nice, okay? And I just put this in the toaster, okay? I see you laughing over there, honey. I know you're listening to me. Okay, and then, oh, what Marcus loves, when you do it this way, you end up with the little tip of the bread that goes on the corner, on the very top. And in Catalan, it's called la punteta. It's a little the point, okay? He loves that. And when we get that bread, and usually in Spain and everywhere, people fight for this little tiny bit because they love the crust, okay? I don't use this in the recipe, but I give it away. Put some olive oil on there and some salt, and you got a little delicious snack while you're cooking. So then we're gonna put the, sprinkle the parsley in here. And we're gonna add a little salt, pepper. I like to use sea salt. And some pepper. And we're gonna let that stir around. Now by now, my wine that I put in there has evaporated for the most part. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna serve that on our little piece of toast. So I'm gonna get a spoon here. I'm gonna serve that on here. Now, one of the things I like to do about this recipe, one of the things I like about it, like even today, I was able to pre-cook most of what was in here before everybody arrived for the happy hour. So this makes it a very good recipe to do, oops, don't drop it like I did. It makes it a very good recipe to do when friends come over, because you can get everything prepared in advance, and then you can serve it just at the last minute. And then another thing you can do, if you don't want to go through the trouble of preparing each person's individual little tiny tapa of toast, you can just serve it in a bowl. Just put the whole thing into a bowl and surround the bowl with pieces of your toast with the blue cheese on it, and then let everybody serve themselves as they want to do. So serve it on a nice platter, a little white platter, a little parsley here off to the side. But don't forget to throw in a little splash of white wine, because it gives you the juices you need. And if it gets too dried out, it's okay. Throw in a little more wine, never hurt. You know, it goes well with the food. Okay, and this is going to go great with the Tempranillo, because the Tempranillo has this quality that why is it a favorite? Why it is one of our flagship wines? Because it pairs so well with so many things. It's going to go great with this meal because of the prosciutto. It's got that meatiness, that earthiness that you get from the mushrooms and the shiitake mushrooms. And so it's a really great wine to pair with so many things. So anyways, I don't know how much, let's see, we have a few more minutes. I don't know if Elyse or somebody else wants to talk a little bit about Tempranillo, but before I am done with my moment here, I just wanted to say that this has really been fun, and it's so amazing to see such an outpouring of just support for us right now. The curbside pickups, the wine shipments have been amazing, and I can thank you all so much for supporting us. And And just we're trying to invent new ways. If you like this, let us know, because we want to do more of these. And to think that we have this crowd that is nearby. Once again, shout out to David Warfolk. Happy birthday, man. My neighbor and right around the corner. Shout out to people that have been on our wine club tours to Spain and those who were planning to go with us this year. Thank you guys for joining us. And newcomers from Ohio. I mean, it's just really cool. And Meme, it's like 2:30 in the morning. Hola, Meme. Hola. Thank you for joining us, Meme. We love you, and we love all of you. So thank you for staying in touch, and we'll continue to stay in touch over the next several weeks or however long this lasts. We just love you guys. So
yeah, thank you so much. We just are so appreciative of everyone who took the time out of their day to see what we're doing here. And just be part of our family. We really, really appreciate it. I'm very lucky because I get to go home to eat all that food.
Yeah, I'm here by myself.
Yeah. Well, I just want to say thank you to everybody, because you've all been huge supporters, and it's, you know, this is such a weird time, and you know, I feel so very fortunate and lucky to be working for a company like Bokisch Vineyards right now. You know, we're in a really good space, and we're just trying to do what we can to help, you know, all the people who are out there trying to buy wine, and we're just trying to do the best that we can, you know, just to be here for everybody and be here for ourselves. And so, you know, I just want to say thank you to all of you for being here and for supporting us. And I really look forward to seeing you all again sometime very soon, because I miss your faces around here. So.
And I would just like, I know we can't see everybody right now, but I know everybody out there has to have a glass of wine in their hand. So I just want everybody to say, count of three, salute. Okay, so
I think everybody should open up and have a big salute to end.
Yeah, salute everybody. Are you ready?
I won't block you guys anymore.
1, 2.
Thank you. Cheers. Cheers. Cheers.
Salute.
Bye bye. Good night.
Bye. Good night. Good night.
Cheers.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Love you, Meme.
Meme, this is Jeff. Good night. I love you.
So much.
I love you.
Thank you for putting this on.
Everybody.
This was fun. We enjoyed it.
Guys.
This was awesome. Let's do it again.
Love you. Yes.
Thank you.
Hi, Jeff. Hello, Jeff.
Hi.
Wow, it's amazing.
To Meme.
Hello. You can see? You can see me?
Yeah.
You can see?
Oh, you got the card. Well, somebody needs to put me back on. Well, hold on.
Turn your screen back on.
I tried to. Rich did it. Put me back on, Rich.
Hold on. Everybody should be
like a meeting of
back on now.
Hey, Rich, put me back on.
Daddy, I'll get you back on. Don't worry.
Okay, no worries.
We don't need Rich for that.
Oh, here we are.
Happy birthday.
Hey.
Not there. I was
Love you, Meme.
Hello, Adam.
Hey, Meme.
Hello. Thank you, everybody.
There she is. Hi, Meme.
One moment, please. Another time.
Salute.
Salute.
Salud. Salud.
Salute. I'm going to WhatsApp you in the morning, Meme.
We love you, Meme.
She's 2 in the morning there.
Another time, you can. Another time, you can make it at noon.
At noon.
Okay. And for me, will be 9.
9 o'clock.
Good.
I know.
9 o'clock. because now is 3 o'clock.
AM.
AM. In the morning.
Wait.
Drinking wine at 3 o'clock in the morning, no way to start a day.
What is that, public? Like that's
Thank you
Oh,
so
look at her. Oh, she did the hair. She did the hair.
Love you, Mama.
I love you, Meme.
We love
I
all
love you.
guys.
Me
I love
too.
you, sister.
No,
Please,
Thank you so
please.
much. Thank you.
It's too bad.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, we're logging off.
We'll do it again soon.
Okay, bye.